I have been looking forward to this session ever since last summer, when I began talking with scientists who led these trials. During the session, Cheryl Borden, my co-presenter, and I will offer information about many plants that led the pack in these trials. If you want more low-water plants that look great, these winners may provide the answer. And if you simply want more plant choices for your garden, but don't have time to do the research, we'll talk about the Great Plant Pick program, which can be a time-saving resource. To prepare for this talk, Cheryl and I reviewed information from 7 organizations. The top 5 grow plants in the field to compare performance, and the last 2 bring together professionals and use their knowledge to judge plant performance. We selected 3 to feature today. The PNW plant trial, phase 1 of the Climate Ready trial in California, both of them offer plants that do well in the summer heat with little to no irrigation. And we'll also talk about the Great Plant Picks program, which provides a resource for reliable plant performance information. There is no need to take notes. All of the links to these 7 organizations, in addition to other resources we mentioned, will be sent to you along with the PNW trials and the California Climate Ready trial. Become familiar with some of the winners from each trial and know how to use them in your garden. We also would like to get acquainted with the Great Plant Picks program and know how to use their resources. So first, an overview on these 3. How are they alike and different? The Climate Ready trials were done in California. The focus was on irrigation needs. So the trials were conducted with 3 levels of summer irrigation, and the plants were grown in sandy to clay soil. The test plants all came from the US, so they are available in the trade. The PNW trials were field trials done in the northern part of Oregon's Willamette Valley. The focus is on drought-tolerant plants for a non-irrigated landscape. The plants were grown in clay loam-based soil with no summer irrigation. And for both of these trials, the first season is considered establishment, which means that the plants were irrigated, and then in future years, there was no irrigation, or irrigated for the California trials at one of the 3 levels. The PNW trials used plants available from the US, but they also imported plants from abroad, which then introduced new varieties into the local horticultural trade. The Great Plant Pick program is a very different setup. They rely on observations from professionals. So they're basically evaluating plant performance that are already grown in gardens, arboretum, nursery display gardens, and they also visit the field trial sites to take information into their nominating process. And again, they rely on professionals serving on various committees in order to come up with the plant list. Well, I'm going to begin with the PNW plant trial. These are tests done in northern part of the Willamette Valley. Each group of plants, they tested plants by genus, and each group lasted over 4 to 8 years in the trial period. And this is USDA Zone 8. So these trials began with Neil Bell, who is an Oregon State horticulturist and professor, and later on, Heather Sullivan joined the team. Neil is a plant geek. In his private garden on 5 acres, he grows many unusual plants with no water or very little summer irrigation. So he began these trials with 3 goals in mind. He wanted to promote the use of plants that need no summer irrigation, And he realized he needs to generate reliable performance data in order for these new or underused drought-tolerant plants to become attractive to nursery owners, propagators, and home gardeners. And because he's a plant lover, he also took advantage of these trials to import new plants into the US. And I know many of them went into the horticultural trade. Neil mentioned at least 4 nurseries went to his trial site to take cuttings, and they included cistus, dancing oaks, Van Havelingen, and Zira. Although these are Oregon nurseries, I know more than, I think 3 of them do mail order. So I'm going to begin with the Ceanothus trial, which was the first group of plants Neil began to grow. And you probably know that Ceanothus is commonly called California lilac. Most of them are native to the Western North America area. So they're adapted to our wet winter, dry summer climate. And they do well in poor soil because in a similar fashion to our garden beans and peas, they can fix nitrogen. So these plants were put into construction fill that's classified as clay soil. And to break up the compaction, they used a disc similar to what's in this picture to reduce the compaction and break up the soil. And after planting, there was 3 inches of wood chips added to the area. Plants were irrigated the first summer, and then no supplemental water in future years. And these are Neil's top 5 Ceanothus. He tried dozens and dozens of varieties, and based on overall performance, chose these as his top 5. I'm going to begin with the one in the upper right, Blue Jean. It is the earliest bloomer, generally beginning to bloom in early March, and the flowers will persist for quite a long time. If we move to the center, Victoria is a commonly available variety, stately looking shrub with lighter blue flowers. And if you go to the lower left corner, Cuneatus is an Oregon native. If you're hiking the Cascade Mountains, you might have run into it. And this photo was taken along Highway 99 in a field. All 3, Cuneatus, Victoria, and Blue Jean, are good-sized shrubs. They're evergreen, and they will get to about 8 by 8. In contrast, the Versailles is a semi-evergreen Ceanothus, and it blooms on new wood, which means that the flowers will not come until midsummer. And it's a smaller shrub reaching roughly 6 by 6. And finally, as a contrast, many of the Ceanothus are grown as ground cover. This one, Gloriosus, as you can see in the picture, has a very low form, get to about 2 feet high and about 5 feet in diameter. It's an excellent weed suppressing ground cover. Ceanothus is one of the sources of early flowers for bees. And this table shows when they bloom and how long they bloom for a number of the test varieties. And again, as you can see, if you have the space and you have the ability to mix and match varieties, you can get lovely floral display from late winter into summer. If you grow Ceanothus, I think they will be a great match with an area that is sunny with no summer irrigation, and they are low maintenance and can attract pollinators early in the season. Because they take poor soil, think about the areas in your garden. Perhaps the soil is compacted, and if you put Ceanothus there, you only need to use something like this spading fork, shown in the picture, to loosely break up the soil. I mean, I shouldn't say loosely, roughly break up the soil. They can still be really chunky, and just put the plants in there and they will do great. For the PNW trial, all of the ceanothus were grown in the construction site over construction fill, and they did great. So full sun, well-drained soil, no supplemental water during the summer after the first season, and they'll do great in that area. What would go well with the ceanothus? You might think, well, anything that is adapted to the Mediterranean climate, or the drought-tolerant Oregon natives, or even ornamental grasses can be good companion with the ceanothus. And that would include cistus and Helimium, which is another group of plants that Neil evaluated. Cistus and Helimium are commonly called rock rose, and they're native to mostly the Mediterranean area. For the trial, again, clay soil was mechanically broken up to reduce the compaction, and they're not amended, not fertilized. After planting, the soil was not mulched. Plants were watered the first season, but not in future years. And these are Neil's top 5. Just by looking at the pictures, you can tell these plants are kind of a low mound. They tend to be wider than they're tall. Let's begin with the one in the upper left corner, the obtusifolias. It has dense foliage, gorgeous white flowers. And if you want something that has a golden ray of sunshine in the garden, maybe the Helimium sandling is what you would like to try. And if you like magenta flowers, the Cistus sunset is one that will begin blooming in May, which is usually when most of the Cistus and Helimium will begin to bloom. But sunset will reach full bloom in June, and then sporadically continue to have flowers into August. So these top 3 all have about the same size, roughly 2 to 2.5 feet tall, and they can grow to 5 feet diameter. If you want something a little bigger, the lower 2, Snowfire and Gordon Cooper, will get a bit taller, 3.5 feet high, and a little wider, up to 7 feet in diameter. And all of these are really dense foliage plants, so you can imagine how well they would do in suppressing weeds underneath. If you have an area that is, let's say you have a corner lot, or you just have a space that's next to the sidewalk in full sun with reflected heat, I think Cistus and Helimium will do particularly well there. Also, look at the picture of the Snowfire. You can underplant it with maybe golden oregano, or this is a native carex grass, in order to pick up a little bit of the color echo. I think they would make lovely combinations. Again, cistus like full sun, lean soil, and don't give them water after they have established in the first season. They don't like to be pruned, and if you need to prune them back, be sure not to cut too hard into the old wood, because they will not regrow from there. And very much like ceanothus, they do well with other Mediterranean climate plant, drought-tolerant Oregon natives, or ornamental grasses. I can actually see, if you have the space cistus grown with the ceanothus, I think they will make a lovely combination. One of the other groups Neil tried is Arctostaphylos. They're commonly called manzanita, and they're native primarily to the western part of North America. But the commonly grown ground cover kinnikinnick, that's the common name, is native to North America, Europe, and Asia. The trial protocol is similar. Plants were put into basically it's clay-based soil in full sun. There is no mulch after planting, water the first summer, no irrigation afterwards, and no other any types of intervention in terms of disease, pest, or pruning. Well, in fact, these plants are pretty tough and they really tend not to have disease pest problems. These are Neil's top 5. Arctostaphylos come in many different forms. They can be a large shrub, grown as a small tree. They can be rounded shrubs. They can be ground cover. So these top 5 span the gamut. If you look at the right 2, the one called Select Form is an excellent ground cover with glossy green foliage, and it will get to only about 18 inches high and 3 foot in diameter. The one in the lower right is Arctostaphylos uva ursi, commonly called kinnikinnick, and this one is called Radiant. When it comes to native shrubs and trees, often you might see a cultivated name like this one that's Radiant. It does not mean it's a plant that's made in a lab by somebody crossing or doing something to mess up the genetics. Most likely it's because a plant collector hiking in the mountains saw a plant that looked particularly attractive, perhaps better form, perhaps nicer foliage, perhaps more attractive flower. Anyway, for whatever reason, the collector took a sample and propagated the cutting and gave it a name. So in this instance, Radiant is something that's collected in nature and it's propagated in the horticultural trade for people to grow in a garden. If you grow kinnikinnick as a ground cover, be sure you choose a plant that originated from Oregon or California. I understand in the trade, the kinnikinnick cultivar called Massachusetts is commonly available. Well, you don't want one that's from the East Coast because it's not going to be as summer drought tolerant than one from Oregon or California. Okay, to go to the left side, we have 2 wide form shrubs. The Buena Vista gets to about 4 foot high, 8 feet wide, and the Arctostaphylos columbiana cross with Patula will get to a little bit larger, maybe 5 feet tall. Again, this cross between columbiana and Patula was made in nature, and someone simply collected the cutting and then propagated for horticulture. Finally, Arctostaphylos sentinel. Look at the flowers. Isn't that just so amazing? I have this plant in my garden. It blooms usually in late, maybe February, and it's adorned by bumblebees. It also has mahogany bark that's typical to Arctostaphylos. And I grow it in my garden by limbing it up as shown in this picture. So it sort of looks like a small tree. And I use it as a backdrop for this garden scene. You can see the Arctostaphylos dark bark in the back. So keep in mind that they can look like a small tree or a rounded shrub or a ground cover, as long as you keep them in full sun, well-drained soil. Poor soil, rocky soil is a good match. They will give you a year-round of interest and no trouble-free. The next trial is PNW ground cover trial. This trial started in 2019, and it's so new that there's no website and there's no available published data. So what I share with you is what is publicly available that Neil was willing to share. For this test, their definition for ground cover is anything that will grow wider than tall and will compete well with weeds. So as you can imagine, the test plants had a huge variety. Similar protocol for the trial. They planted into native soil, mechanically broken up, but not amended, no fertilizer. They did use weed mat to suppress weeds before these plants get to a large enough size to do the job themselves. And because these plants were installed in the fall, they were only watered a few weeks until the rain season began. And then in the future summer, there was no water involved. And again, no pruning, no disease pest management. Oh, sorry. These are the top 5. Let's begin with the lower left, the Cotoneaster Emerald Beauty. Now, this plant is different. It did come from the OSU breeding program, so you can see the TM, the trademark. It is a great weed suppressor, get to about a foot high and 3 feet diameter. Above it is Baccharis, commonly called coyote bush. This is a native from Southern Oregon. Its distinguishing feature is September bloom with scent. Can you imagine that? Something that blooms in September and has scent, that will be a welcome addition in the garden. It will get to about 3 foot high, 6 foot wide, so it is quite a large shrub. The one in the middle, Helianthemum, I think many of you are familiar with. It's commonly called sunrose. Flowers come in many colors. All of them are good. This one happens to be Hanfield Brilliant. And it will get to about a foot and a half high to about 3 foot in diameter. The upper right, Bellota, is a nice shrub, about 2 feet round. And it has purple bloom in July, which is adorned by bumblebees. If you grow this plant, just shear it after bloom, kind of similar to lavender. And finally, the Phlomis margaritae. Look at the gorgeous combination of the silvery, fuzzy leaves and the pale yellow flowers. I just love this image. And in fact, after I got the information from Neil, I very quickly bought my own. And it's going into a dry and sunny part of my garden. This plant will get to about 3 foot high and 5 foot wide. I'm going to end with the PNW Hebe trial. This trial is totally different from all the other previous trials that I've shared with you so far, because Hebe are pretty much like your common garden plant. It likes a little enrichment in the soil. It likes a little fertilizer. It likes some mulch, and it definitely likes summer water. And these are Neil's top 5. The lower 3 are perfect foliage plants that will add year-round interest and color in your garden. They do bloom, but the flowers are insignificant, and you really grow them for the foliage effect. The Emerald Gem is a tiny little 1 foot high and wide ball, and Boughton Dome is roughly a 2 foot wide and tall ball. It maybe get a little wider than is tall. And Carol Golden Ask will get to about between 2 and 3 foot high and wide. As you can see, all of them just have perfect looking foliage when they're grown in full sun. The top 2, Caledonia, clearly is a great flower producer, and it will get to about 2 foot high and 3 foot wide. And then finally, Hebe Imberre is an excellent ground cover for a hillside that's irrigated. It's an excellent ground cover because it will root as the branch grow and expand. So it will do a great job in kind of holding on to the soil. It will only get to about 8 inches high, and it can get to 3 to 4 foot in diameter. So if you garden with Hebe, put them in full sun to part shade, but treat them as other garden plants. They do like summer water, not a whole lot of water, but consistently. And if you've grown Hebe before and cold hardiness was an issue for you, keep in mind the leaf size generally is a good indicator. The smaller the leaf, the more hardy. So if you grow those tender varieties, just put them in a protected area or do them in, keep them in a container. Well, this concludes the PNW plant trial information I'm ready to share. And keep in mind, all of the trials have their individual website links. They're in this slideshow, and they also are going to be sent to you with resources. And with that, I'm going to stop share and invite Cheryl to share her portion.
Thank you, Sherry. So many beautiful plants and low irrigation to boot, a huge plus, I would say. It's my pleasure, though, to be able to tell you about the University of California plant irrigation trials, or the Climate Ready trials. Now, I know California is in a warmer climate, but even so, their procedures for determining how much irrigation is required to produce lush and lovely plants may have some lessons for us here in Oregon. Here's the information I hope you'll acquire during my portion of the presentation. Understand the purpose of the plant irrigation trials, know a little bit about the history of the project, understand the criteria they use in evaluating the plants that they test, understand how the trial results are important to you, the home gardener, and then we'll take a look at some attractive plants. Reducing irrigation is something we all are considering when we plant trees and shrubs in our home landscape. So I'm hoping this information from the University of California Landscape Plant Trials will assist you in considering attractive plant selections for your home landscape. University of California horticulturists are evaluating landscape plants with the potential to be good performers in low water use gardens. In the very early years of the trials, the plants they tested were California natives from the University of California Davis Arboretum All-Stars list. But today, their trials are about exciting new cultivars provided by growers and breeders who want to evaluate their new plant varieties for low water use in these hot California gardens. The results provide growers and gardeners with the information they need to successfully grow a wide variety of low water use plants. The University of California Landscape Plant Trial irrigation trials began as a graduate student research project using the Arboretum specimens in about 2004. The scope originally was to see how low they could go, giving water to plants in the hot California summers. By 2009, they had so much success, they decided they would try a shade structure to test some shade plants out. And in addition, they're starting to attract a lot of interest from members of the plant growing industry. And by 2012, all the plants in the trials were now provided by industry partners wanting to develop cultivars that will require only low water. The plant trials require 2 years. Planting occurs in the fall with establishment that first summer. No pesticides or fertilizer treatments are applied to the plants during the trial period. Deficit irrigation, low irrigation, and evaluations take place during the plant's second summer. Plants are placed in native soils and they're mulched around their root zone. In Irvine, the zone is a 10A zone with native soil of fine sandy loam. In Davis, the zone is 9B, and the native soil is heavy silty clay loam. So they have 2 different kinds of soils on which they're testing these plants. The researchers irrigate the plants regularly during their first 12 months in the ground to prevent stress and develop a healthy, established plant with a deep root system. Regularly irrigating means once a week. They provide no irrigation to the plants during the winter months unless there's some sort of unusual drought situation they need to consider. Near the end of their first summer of growth, irrigating is being spaced out gradually to slowly wean the plants from a regular watering schedule and encourage deep rooting. 3 levels of irrigation are provided to the plants based upon the plant's needs and any signs of stress or lack of vigor and blooming. The objective is to provide the plant with just enough water to thrive, minimizing water use. The volume of water applied is the same at each irrigation period based on the soil characteristics of the planting site, but the interval between the application varies depending on the weather. I'd also like to mention that in Irvine, this picture on the left shows purple piping. Irvine uses reclaimed water only in the irrigation of their plant trial space, which is a great feature. Irvine is kind of ahead of the nation in using reclaimed water. And let's face it, we need to figure out ways to reuse water if possible. Researchers collect data monthly, including the height, width, and length of the plant. In addition, quality ratings are done to assess the irrigation treatment's effect on plant health and plant appearance. The following categories are used when judging plant quality: foliage, flowering, fruiting, pest tolerance and disease resistance, vigor, and overall appearance. All these are rated on a scale of 1, which is unacceptable, to 5, which is perfect, to excellent. At the end of each 2-year trial period, information is released, providing nursery growers and home gardeners with information about the best performers throughout the trial. Blue ribbon winners are plants that looked good with the lowest possible irrigation. Pictured here is a Vitex that was part of the test. It's gorgeous looking, isn't it? If you're looking for what's new in the plant and gardening world, trial gardens can be a hidden gem. They offer a unique and enriching experience for both the seasoned gardener to the curious novice, and the plants they recommend can be a perfect way to introduce more diversity into your landscape. And of course, you can be conserving water, as these are low water use plants. As we learn more best how to prepare our landscapes for warmer and drier summers here in Oregon, these plant lists can be important in building a diverse garden that can withstand a variety of climate situations. I'm sharing with you today plants that were selected by the research staff and include cultivars that they felt were not only beautiful, but also require either low to medium levels of irrigation. One of my very favorites here at the top left, Blonde Ambition, is a gorgeous grass. I particularly love the little kinky seed head it develops on the end. It can be placed in a pot or in your landscape, not requiring much irrigation at all to be absolutely gorgeous. This little tiny tangerine bull bean has lovely little delicate flowers and a spiky form, which adds a lot of interest to your garden. Sherry talked a lot about ceanothus. This one is wonderful and unexpected, as it is possesses pink blossoms, not blue blossoms. Low water use for this one. I never turn away from a hardy cranesbill, and this one fills the bill. And I love cranesbill because they play well with other plants in my garden, sort of entangling themselves. A lovely Lenten rose to brighten those long days before spring emerges. And last, this Delta Eclipse crepe myrtle, a fall bloomer that's a real stunner and also takes a low water use. I've also included here some of my favorites, and I clearly realize now, having studied about this trial, that I am giving away too much water to my hot lip salvia. No wonder it gets so out of control. So low water, I can cut back on my water use there. This beautiful soft caress Chinese mahonia absolutely gleams in the shade. It does require moderate water, but it's beautiful, isn't it? And last, but absolutely not least, this beautiful landscape pink rose. All these beauties are good reasons to check out the landscape trials and see if there's something there that will work for your landscape. If you explore the links I provided here, you'll find many plant recommendations for low or moderate irrigation. In many plant trials, there are many plant trials all over the United States. So if you're watching us from a region not in the Willamette Valley, check out your area for a plant trial near you. And now, as Sherry said, we're going to explore a little bit about Great Plant Picks, which is another kind of a plant trial. This trial focuses on the horticulture of the Maritime Pacific Northwest, and it is conducted by horticulturists and industry professionals. It grew as an outreach program of the Elizabeth Miller Botanical Garden located in the Seattle area. It started in 2000 by a former director, Richard Hartledge. The plant trials are committed to building a comprehensive palette of outstanding plants and focuses on sharing horticulture information with the gardening community and the Maritime Pacific Northwest. Pacific Northwest zones are 6 through 9 with some areas in Zone 5, and I've included here a link to the hardiness zone map of the United States for those of you that might be watching and live in other climate zones. The mission statement of the Great Plant Picks is as follows: create a comprehensive list of hardy, reliable plants for home gardeners and industry professionals focused on the Maritime Pacific Northwest. Provide easily accessible information to home gardeners and industry professionals, and provide accurate names, pictures, and critical information about selected plants in an easy way that people can use. I've included their website here. Remember, you don't have to write down any of this information. It will all be included with the link to you. The Great Plant Picks Selection Committee is made up of expert horticulturists from Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. Members represent wholesale and retail nurseries, garden designers, and botanical garden directors. The committee is divided into 3 subcommittees: shrubs and vines, trees and conifers, perennials, and bulbs. These subcommittees work together, observing plants in different settings and conditions. And sometimes they might even employ an advisory group, 3 to 5 experts in a particular cultivar, to give them advice on what they happen to be seeing regarding the plant. They also visit nurseries and gardens to observe new and rare plants in a field setting. Only occasionally do they use trials and an evaluation period, much like the universities do, because that does require a collection of plants to be planted in an area and observed over a period of 2 to 3 years. Sometimes they also select a collection in a botanical garden or a public space, and they visit it over a 2 or 3 year period to vet its ability to meet the criteria of Great Plant Picks. And of course, their professional and personal experience, which they have many years of, helps them discuss and decide which plants best meet Great Plant Picks criteria. Nominations for Great Plant Pick status are made by committee members. They set no limit on the number of plants they take under consideration. They will take suggestions from the public or from industry professionals, but before they add them to the nominated list, they usually put them in the Miller Botanical Garden for testing first. Plants under consideration by the selection committee are placed in the following categories. They are first nominated, evaluated, and the review of their performance can go on for 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on the plant and cultivar. Then they're shortlisted. They are just about perfect, but there's some minor questions that need resolution. Often that involves availability, since they're committed to making sure the plants they put on their lists are available to gardeners. Then it becomes a great plant pick, an excellent performer in the Maritime Pacific Northwest and fulfills the criteria for great plant pick status. Or perhaps they're eliminated, criteria not met for one reason or another. Here are the criteria for selection as a great plant pick. It must be hardy in zones 6 through 9, be long-lived, be vigorous and easy to grow by a gardener of average means and experience, be reasonably disease and pest resistance, be available from at least 2 retail plant sources in the US and Canada, be adaptable to a variety of soil and fertility conditions, not require excessive irrigation, not be invasive or overly vigorous. Perennials should be sturdy and low in maintenance. That sounds good, doesn't it? No staking or excessive deadheading. Bulbs are considered long-term perennials and should last for at least 2 years. And variegated plants should be stable and not excessively revert to their native foliage. It is true that Great Plant Picks will occasionally remove plants from a list if they've somehow failed to meet criteria after some time passes, but more often than not, it gets delisted due to a lack of availability rather than due to a plant problem. It takes a team. Great Plant Picks works in cooperation with Washington State and Oregon State University's cooperative extensions. In British Columbia, Canada, the Ministry of Agriculture, and they cooperated with master gardeners throughout Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. Sherry and I felt it would be helpful if we could demonstrate how to use Great Plant Picks to plan a new garden bed. So I'm going to show you my process for planning a garden bed in full sun, and then Sherry will talk about her selection process for a garden in shade to partial shade. First, I need to set down some criteria or expectations for what I want this garden bed to be like. I want plants needed for a garden bed with a cottage garden style. The flower bed size is 16 feet by 8 feet in full sun. Clay soil has a neutral pH, and I'm gardening in zone 8. Plants selected should have more than one season of interest or a long bloom period. I want some bang for my bucks. Plants should be semi-drought tolerant to drought tolerant. And I like multiple layers of planting. That'll be the most pleasing, with a tree, shrubs, evergreens, flowering perennials, and/or annuals. So you'll have to decide what your style is. Are you Zen, cottage, natural, wild? You, of course, need to consider exposure to sun and shade, soil type and planting zone, and any irrigation needs that you may need to provide or set up in your garden bed. Okay, now how about finding the plants? Okay, I got my criteria. Well, Great Plant Picks can assist in selecting cultivars that will meet the needs of many garden styles. The website will tell you plant requirements, mature size, bloom period, and attractiveness to wildlife such as bees and birds. Once you get that list, then you can head out to explore nurseries in your area to see that if they have what you desire. First, you will put this link into your browser. You'll click on Plant Search. Scroll down and place 1 to 4 search requirements into the form. For example, tree or shrub, or ground cover, full sun, partial sun, shade, spring blooming. Once you've put in 1 to 4 of your search requirements, Great Plant Picks will generate a list of results that you can examine. This is what your page will look like. This happens to be a tree that I just clicked on so that you could have an example of what this page will look like. Quick facts: it's a tree, deciduous, its size in 10 years, its size when it is mature. That's important when you have a finite amount of space in your yard. Its hardiness zones, flowering color, flowering time, necessary exposure to sun and light, watering requirements, seasonal interest, and wildlife associations. And there are always a few little cultural notes like plant in full sun to light to open shade. Little pruning is needed, something we always want to hear. It even cautions against excessive pruning as it can ruin the shape of this tree. So this is how I did it. I needed to select a tree. My tree needs to be somewhat small in size, tolerant of full sun, with a spring bloom and a fall leaf color. I selected tree, deciduous, spring flowering, full sun, and here's what I found. One possibility: a fernleaf full moon maple. Has a spring bloom, fall color, and outstanding foliage, and in 10 years reaches a 10-foot by 8-foot size. I kept looking. Another wonderful choice is the Chinese or Kusa dogwood variety Milky Way. Also blooms in the spring, and you can see how lovely those blossoms are. Red fruit and colorful leaves in the fall. Its height is, in 10 years, is 18 feet, and its width is also 18 feet. Okay, this is going to present a problem for me. The size of my proposed flower bed isn't large enough to accommodate this tree. I decided that the fernleaf full moon maple is the tree for my site. Lovely textured foliage, maintains a small size, exhibits wonderful fall color, and the form of this tree will also provide winter interest. But I also require some evergreen shrubs to offer winter interest when all the other plants have gone dormant. I found both of these selections appealing. I really like the brightness of the golden hinoki cypress. It just kind of pops out at you, doesn't it? Both of these are pyramidal in shape. But upon closer examination, the golden hinoki cypress, while a wonderful color, grows to a height of 25 feet, pretty big for my site. And it also rather prefers light shade to full sun, while the dwarf hinoki cypress grows only to 3 feet in height and does tolerate full sun. And it's got a lovely shiny green foliage, so I think my decision is made. But I also want to add a flowering evergreen shrub to allow for another season of interest in the garden. I looked on Great Plant Picks for shrubs with a spring bloom, interesting foliage, and a mature size of about 5 feet by 5 feet. These are the two shrubs that I found. They are both similar in that they're both a Pyrrhus. This Pyrrhus japonica caventine is evergreen and it's 4 by 4 with white blooms in spring. Pyrrhus Brower's Beauty is evergreen, but it's 5 by 5 in the spring. Of course, it still blooms white. And I decided that I would elect to do the caventine variety because it is smaller than the other hybrid. And since I never trust that they're going to be exactly the size they say, even though Great Plant Picks does a wonderful job of vetting these plants, I'm going to go for the smaller one. And the benefit of selecting a Pyrrhus is that they're attractive to mason bees as it blooms in the early spring in time for them to be out foraging. But now I need some colorful plants. My criteria for perennials are that they be no higher than 1.5 feet to 3 feet tall. I want them to have a long bloom period, including the fall season. So I selected this Astra variety. It's compact, blooms from July to October, and will complement the shrubs I selected. It also is attractive to pollinators. I want to add more perennials for contrast, but I want to know what would work best. So I went back to Great Plant Picks and went back to the Frick Arts Astra page to see what plants would combine well. And I see that they provided me a list of plants I can explore. And I chose to check out the Euphorbia and the Caryopteris incana to see if I think they're suitable for my garden bed. So since plants that combine well with perennials in purple and lavender were suggested Euphorbia and Caryopteris, I took a really close look at them. And I decided I really liked the Caryopteris incana, mostly because of this gorgeous blue blossom and the lime green foliage. I do like euphorbias, but it looks to me like this euphorbia is going to get too large to be managed in my small garden space. So I'm choosing this one because I think it will be a real statement in my new garden bed. In reviewing my plant collections, my good garden design friend Laura Iyer helped me realize that I hadn't really thought about different textures in my garden bed. Something spiky or mounded would still fit in my plan. Laura suggested golden variegated sweet flag, as it not only has a variegated color foliage, but a spiky form and does not grow very large. I have now met the criteria of my original plan. The plants are low maintenance, semi to drought tolerant, includes evergreens for year-round interest, blooms that will last into fall and thrive in the sun. And here is my summary. The fernleaf full moon maple will be in the center. It'll be the star with golden bluebird, Frick Arts aster, Chamaecyparis obtusa nanogracilis, the dwarf lily of the valley, Pyrrhus caventine, and the golden variegated sweet flag, Acorus gramineus Oregon. And now it's time for a drawing, courtesy of Laura Iyer. Laura drew up the design for me, and she put that lovely fernleaf full moon maple right in the middle, which is great. The numbers on the drawing correlates with the plant picture shown here. Laura draws rounded shapes to indicate deciduous or herbaceous plants that lose their leaves in the wintertime. The spiky shapes mean the plants are evergreen. They were all placed to reflect their mature growth. And all these plants, I'm happy to say, require little or no maintenance, except for those asters. They'll just need to be cut down in the fall. I also love the way Laura grouped the asters in a group of 5 and the grass, the sweet flag, in a group of 3. A lot more impact when you group in odd numbers. For ease at the nursery and accuracy in selecting plants, it's important to compile a list of all of them and include their common and Latin name to make sure you get the cultivar you picked. I also included the number of plants I'll require to fill out the entire bed. And now Sherry's going to share her selections for a shade garden.
I put together a hypothetical shade garden, same size as Cheryl's, 16 by 8. Zone 8, dapple shade, clay-based dryish soil, and watering is a big thing for me. So I want to do hand watering once a week during the summer month, no water the rest of the year. And I want layers of shrubs, perennial and ground cover, mostly evergreen and low maintenance. So this is what I came up with. Using a similar search process that Cheryl has shown you, I ended up with these plants. To begin with, the top one is an evergreen conifer, but small. And then the next 3 are shrubs. Sarcococa is evergreen shrub with shiny leaves, and Chianthus is a deciduous shrub with early season flower and nice fall foliage. And Daphne, I think most of us know, it has wonderful fragrance early in the year. And finally, 3 ground covering kind of plants, a fern, a hellebore, and brunnera for the silver foliage. And this is how they come together. This drawing shows my evergreen being anchored in the center of the bed, flanked by my deciduous shrub and Chianthus and my evergreen shrub, Sarcococa. And then the Daphne is in the front of the bed to allow me to enjoy the fragrance fully. And these bigger plants are surrounded by smaller ground covers with hellebores and brunnera and fern. And that completes the design. So in summary, gardeners can benefit from the research of universities, botanical gardens, and professional organizations that conduct plant trials. These results from the programs can help gardeners select plants that perform well in the home garden. Of course, you will want to select from programs where the conditions for testing and the criteria for professional recommendations best match your garden and your interest. And remember, new trials and selections of plants are changing yearly. So there's always more information that become available and help us in how we garden. Now, all the resources that we have mentioned in these presentations are here. Again, you're going to get them with the recording link. And with that, Cheryl and I are going to be happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi, Cheryl.
Okay, I
So,
do. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, great information. Tell me about Great Plant Pick. Do they have a category about plant's ability to endure pests like deer or other mammals?
That's an
Is that one of the search criteria in Great Plant Pick? I can't remember.
It is not one of the search criteria.
Ah.
Unfortunately, they do talk about wildlife pairing, what wildlife would be attracted, to certain plants, but not deer, which would be, it is too bad about deer. I feel the pain of anybody who's got deer that keeps things nibbled down.
You know, I did notice there is a question about the watering regimen during the establishment period. So
Right.
I can begin with the PNW trial, how they did it, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about the California trial.
Perfect, perfect.
Okay,
Yes,
so
yeah, there was a question about what does he mean when, how much and how often does Neil establish those
yeah,
plans?
exactly. The PNW plant trials, again, were using a clay-based soil. And as we all know, the clay-based soil can hold water pretty well. So once the soil is saturated, it will hold on to the water for a long time. So on average, they were watering between 7 and 10 days. So think weekly, and they did use either drip system or micro sprinklers for irrigation, depending on the plant type. And so establishment in general refers to helping the plant to get the roots established. And so the plant is really ready to grow. And for any plant trial, whatever is the test that we're trying to do, you want the plant to be ready to grow before you evaluate the performance. And the establishment period for PNW trial in general is the first summer if they planted in the spring. But for some of the trial, including the ground cover trial, because the plants were planted late in the fall, they just watered for a few weeks before the rain began, and that counted as the establishment period. I hope that clarifies it.
That sounds like it's pretty clear. And in the California trials, it's very similar. They use drip emitters. They mulch around the root zone. They water deeply to encourage deep roots, but not more than once a week. And since they plant in the fall, that first year, they too will have to irrigate until the rains begin. And then once the rains begin, they adjust. The California trials uses a very elaborate method for establishing evapotranspiration and levels of irrigation. So they're very sophisticated in how they approach it.
Yes, and that's because their trial is associated with the water restriction in
Right.
California.
Mhm.
So there is a law in restricting water use for irrigation, and that really is one of the primary motivations for these trials. So they have to be exact in how much water is used or allowed to be used, and therefore their trial irrigation levels are 20%, 50%, and 80%
80%.
of what is allowed to be used for the summer irrigation. But the PNW trial, Neil really had the belief so many of the plants don't need water during the summer once they're established. And in fact, if you have gone to places where these Mediterranean origin plants are growing in nature, you see nobody's watering them. And boy, and they're growing in areas where there's no summer rain, and they do great. So
We did have,
obviously, I was going to say in the garden situation, during the establishment period, on average, once a week should be sufficient. But speaking of evapotranspiration, if you have a heat dome and that's the first summer of establishment, you will want to water more often than once a week. So, use your observational skills and use your judgment.
I have two quick questions about ceanothus. One is ceanothus are deer resistant. True? Is that true?
I believe if you ask Neil, he would say, deer, when they're desperate, they will eat anything.
They
They'll
will
try
try
anything.
Mhm.
Yeah. But nearly all of these plants that he tried have very high resin content, which means if you brush the leaves, you can smell this odor or aroma. And that basically makes them somewhat deer proof, or at least not the favorite food.
They're
of
not
deer.
delicious. In fact,
Yeah.
in my personal experience, they will nibble a couple things and throw them down. They don't even consume them. They just hawk
Yeah.
them on the ground. So
Yeah.
the other question was cold tolerance for ceanothus. Did Neil have anything to share about cold tolerance? That ice storm that we had, some people experienced a death of ceanothus.
Yeah, his top 5 are cold hardy, and there's specific cold tolerance information on the website for the ceanothus trial.
Perfect. Since you mentioned the resins, we did get one question about fire resistance and Arctostaphylos. Arctostaphylos, is it a concern when it comes to fire resistance? Should you make sure you don't plant it near your house? That kind of thing?
Well, any plant with resin would be a little more volatile than the plants without.
Because
So
it's
as a rule,
indoor.
these plants are not best for, the first probably 25 to 30 feet around the dwelling.
One last question. They were all beautiful. All the Ceanothus varieties that Neil showed that were his winners are winners. They're all beautiful. Are there availability? One person did want to know about availability of those cultivars.
I think most of these are quite available, and there are a couple of tools I can suggest. I know the Oregon Association of Nurseries on their website has a plant finder function. So if you visited the website, Oregon Association of Nurseries, just put that in your search engine, look at the plant finder. And in my presentation, I gave specific scientific name. So you're able to be really precise in getting the thing that you want. It would tell you which nursery in Oregon has it. And I mentioned the number of nurseries that took cuttings from Neil's trial. And I know those might be good options.
Okay, that was my last question.
All right. Well, I don't have any more questions. It's been a great session, Cheryl. So much fun to do the research and share some new ideas with folks.
I learned a lot in this in the research for this presentation, so I know a lot more than I did. It's great.
And for people who are still here, I want to mention the California trial began with 2 sites in California, but they had since gotten the big grant from USDA to do more plant trials. And that had expanded to the University of Washington, Oregon State, I think Utah State or University of Utah,
You said
and
Utah.
Arizona. So it's all around in the Western US, and there are many more results coming out. So, maybe we'll do an update next year or 2 years from now.
It'd be great.
Yeah. Well, have
Okay.
fun, everybody. Happy gardening.
Bye.